This is a psalm written by David, who lived around 1000 BCE, 30 centuries ago. It was preserved in the Bible about 20 centuries ago. And here I stand, who has lived the better part of 1 century, reading it to you. Such is the immortality of a good lament. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me, from the words of my groaning? Oh, my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but find no rest. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. In you our ancestors trusted. They trusted and you delivered them. To you they cried and were saved. In you they trusted and were not put to shame. But I am a worm and not human, scorned by others, despised by the people. All who see me mock at me. They make mouths at me and they shake their heads. Commit your cause to the Lord. Let him deliver. Let him rescue the one in whom he delights. Yet it was you who took me from the womb. You kept me safe on my mother's breast. On you I was cast from my birth, and since my mother bore me, you have been my God. Do not be far from me. Trouble's near, and there's no one to help. Many bulls encircle me. The strong bulls of Bashan surround me. They open wide their mouths at me like a ravening and roaring lion. I am poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. My heart's like wax. It's melted within my breast. My mouth is dried up like potsherd, and my tongue clings to my jaws. You lay me in the dust of death.
Apine. That's Navajo for good morning. Say it with me. A, pin, eh. Apine. Welcome to Turtle Island, the indigenous name for North America. Indigenous people have lived in the Americas for about 14,000 years. Next slide. This map shows the locations of the tribes and nations in what's now the United States. All of the land that we currently occupy in this country is stolen land as a result of European colonization. The land that we are on right here, right now, was stolen from the Wangunks, the Podunks, the Poquanuks, and the Tunkses. Taking people's land is a form of genocide. Next slide. The doctrine of discovery is the key to understanding European colonization around the world. In the 1400s, when the Portuguese started to explore beyond Europe, the Christian church was located in Rome, and the popes presented the explorers with 3 directives, and these 3 directives made up the doctrine of discovery. The first one in 1452 was, subdue all Muslims and pagans and reduce their persons to perpetual slavery. In 1454, it was added, bring the sheep of God into the single divine fold. In other words, convert them. And in 1493, it included, take possession of all lands not hitherto discovered by other Europeans. This is the beginning of white superiority. And when Columbus landed, and this is an image of Columbus landing in Central America, he brutalized the indigenous people, enslaved them, and killed them when they did not bring him enough gold. Next slide, please. Fast forward, As I'm sure many of you know, there have been many, many treaties signed between the United States government and the indigenous people. Next slide, please. This picture is a picture of a treaty negotiation. Notice how the white men are sitting in a higher, superior position above the indigenous. Most of the treaties were broken by the United States government. The Native Americans never broke a single treaty. Next slide, please. This is a photo of indigenous people in one of their own meetings, and I included it so you get a chance to see the faces and get to see who these people are that we no longer see regularly in our communities. Next slide. Another form of genocide by the colonizers in the Great Plains was to eliminate their main food source, the bison, by shooting them from the windows of hunting trains. Between 1800 and 1900, the bison population was slaughtered from an estimated 30 to 60 million to 325. The intention was to annihilate the indigenous people by destroying their main food source. Genocide. Next slide, please. This is a mountain of bison skulls, which gives you just a sense of the magnitude of that slaughter. Next slide. In 1830, President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act. And the intention here was to free up 25 million acres of fertile land in the southeastern United States, which the white settlers wanted so that they could grow cotton. This is just after the cotton gin was invented. You can see by the different colors, the different tribes that were moved. The northern line, which is blue, is the Cherokee, which is what you probably all know about as the Trail of Tears. The southern, in the red, are the Seminole. And the others, the yellow, the green, and the purple, are the Creek, the Chickasaw, and the Choctaw. More than 46,000 Native Americans were forced to abandon their homes. Some resisted and some did not. And they were moved to what eventually became the state of Oklahoma. In that single removal, more than 4,000 died on the journey of disease, starvation, and exposure to extreme weather. Next slide, please. These are some photographs of some of the people who were forced from their lands. Next slide. Ultimately, the indigenous people were moved again and again and again and pushed onto the reservations we see here. There are 310 Indian reservations in the United States today, although there are more than 550 federally recognized tribes. The total ground covered by these reservations is about 55.5 million acres, or 2.3% of the total land mass of the United States, compared to 100% in the 1400s. If you notice in the Southwest, the largest reservation in red is the Navajo Reservation. And in that red color is a little box that says Hopi. The Hopi are the only indigenous group that was never displaced. Today, the tribes have their own sovereignty, which means they are not governed by local or federal government, but by their own tribal councils. Next slide, please. The next assault on Native Americans was Indian boarding schools. These were established by Christian missionaries. There were 332 schools in 39 states, established by 12 denominations. 59% of them were established by the Catholics, 16.5% by the Presbyterians, and 10% by the Quakers. All the other denominations were very low, 1% or a little bit more. The purpose of these schools was to eradicate their culture and remove their indigenous identity. The phrase used was, kill the Indian, save the man. When they got to these schools, next slide please. When they got to these schools, they were forced to have their hair cut. They were forced to wear American-style uniforms, forbidden from speaking their native languages, and punished severely if they were caught. They had to replace their tribal names with English language names, and told they must abandon their way of life because it was inferior to white people's. Next slide. These are some of the results. Native Americans have never wanted to assimilate. They have always wanted to preserve their culture and their ways. Next slide, please. When I look at these three pictures, the only thing that comes to my mind is this question. Is this what Jesus taught us to do? Next slide, please. In 1925, Calvin Coolidge, who's located in the center of this picture, signed the Indian Citizenship Act. So now remember, women got the vote in 1920. These are the Native Americans who didn't get citizenship until 5 years after that. And even when they didn't have voting rights across the country. They had to fight for the right to vote in each state individually. And it wasn't until 1962, when Utah approved voting, that they had full voting rights across the country. Next slide, please. This is a photograph of Native Americans registering to vote in around 1948. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about some of the contributions, some of the many contributions that Native Americans have made for us. One of the most respected parts of their culture is their value system. They have very high respect for Mother Earth, respect for fellow man, and respect for the Great Spirit, which you heard Doreen talking about. There are many games and inventions that they left for us. Lacrosse might be the one that was most familiar to you, but relay races and ball games also came from the indigenous people. They invented sun goggles for the snow, cable suspension bridges, baby bottles and syringes. The credit for those things have gone to Europeans, not Native Americans. And look at the list of foods. That's just the short list of some of the foods that we now enjoy because of the indigenous people. Next slide, please. You might be very familiar with the Navajo code talkers, and it was the code talkers during World War II that helped the Allies win the war. The Navajos were the most helpful in the Pacific War, but there were many, many other native tribes that were code talkers. The irony here is that in those boarding schools, they were told that they had to abandon their native language and speak English. And then here comes the federal government asking them to use their native language to help us. This statue is at Window Rock, which is the Navajo tribal headquarters in Arizona. Next slide, please. So who are the indigenous people today? These are photographs that I've taken of the people that I have met, and these have been some of my teachers. This is a Lakota Sioux, father and son, in their handmade regalia, not costume, regalia. Next slide. This is Hopi master potter, Dorothy Ami, who listed for us in the board behind her the names of her ancestors and mentors. Next slide, please. This is Travis Terry, a Navajo flute player. He's retired now, but he worked with a dialysis unit. And what he found was that when he taught the waiting patients to play the flute, they relaxed, their veins relaxed, and the IVs were much easier to insert. The doctors were not in favor of this until they started to see the results. Next slide, please. This is a Navajo drummer. And you'll see, if you can see on the board behind him is the word Diné. That is the native term for Navajo. Next slide, please. And now we have Deb Haaland, who's the first Indigenous person who's a member of the U.S. Cabinet. She's the current Secretary of the Interior. She's an enrolled member of the Laguna Pueblo, and her people have lived in the state of what's now the state of New Mexico since the 1200s. And she identifies herself as a 35th generation New Mexican. So I leave you with this thought of, think about all the things that we could learn from these indigenous people if only we would listen.
Today, I want to do something a little different. We heard the wonderful, just remarkable reading of the first 15 verses of Psalm 22 by Libby Merrow. Thank you very much, Libby. That was a remarkable reading. And thank you to Marty Ryan, who leads our Sacred Conversations here at the church, the Sacred Conversations towards ending racism that we have run for 2 years, and for putting this together today. I am going to reread through most of Psalm 22, verses 1 through 15, but just with some commentary and observations as we go along. And what I'm going to ask you to do is place yourself as one of those indigenous people. Place yourself as one of those people at that time. Or if it is better for you, if your people, your culture, your history is one of oppression, place yourself or your ancestors in the place of the person who is speaking here as opposed to King David. Because one of the reasons that all this happened, if we think back on the 3-week series that we went through on gratitude, one of the reasons that all this happened, the genocide, the raping, the killing of 30 million animals for the sole purpose, not for food, not for keeping warm for their coats, but the sole purpose of taking away the food source of another people. It was one thing: greed. Greed. And one of the most powerful things that counterbalances greed is gratitude. You cannot have substantial greed if you have gratitude in your heart. And one of the ways that this greed and taken in action was rationalized was king, country, and a distorted form of religion. Loyalty to king, loyalty to country, loyalty to a certain kind of faith for the sole purpose of saying we are one kind of people and they are other. They are therefore less. That kind of attitude can't continue with the gracious and grateful heart either. So now please place yourself in the place of one of the indigenous people as we go through this psalm again. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me in the words of my groaning? My God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but find no rest. In you, our ancestors trusted. Our ancestors trusted, and you delivered them. To you, our ancestors cried and were saved. In you, our ancestors trusted and were not put to shame. Shame, which was one of the worst of the many horrible things that were used against the people, to have them be ashamed of their culture, ashamed of who they were, saying they were not enough, who they were not enough, that there was a higher standard established by somebody else. To tell them they were to be ashamed of who they were, and to be told they were less than human. Less than human. Remember this verse 6, I am a worm and not human, scorned by others, despised by the people. And that's how they were treated, as less than human. They were thought of as less than human. Their legal status was that of less than human. All those who see me mock me, their way of life mocked, their very nature of who they were mocked. The people make mouths at me and mock me, and they shake their heads at me. Yet it was you who took me from the womb. You kept me safe on my mother's breast. You can hear them calling out for the help, calling out for their ancestors, for strength and support in the midst of all this. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one to help. No one to come and save them, no one to come and back them up. And they knew that. Many bulls encircle me, strong bulls surround me. Imagine being in your home or being outside and suddenly surrounded by horses with whips, surrounded by horses being encircled as the horses literally encircle your family or circle other families, yelling at you and yelling at you. This is the same thing as the bulls encircle me. This isn't just ancient history or 400 or 200 or 100-year-old history. This is happening at the border today. Some of you have seen these pictures of people with whips and stun guns and guns as people try to cross our borders for a better life. The bulls of Bashan are very much alive in our country. They open wide their mouths at me like a ravening and roaring lion. Imagine being trapped in this way, circled up, and then the lion's going in to devour everything that you have, everything that you are, not just you and your family, but the place that you grew up, your food, who you are, the very essence of who you are. With the greed of like a ravening lion coming to devour anything in their path. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax and is melted within my breast. And on that trail of tears, when they were not given enough water, not given enough food, walking through stretches of desert, my mouth is dried up like a potsherd. My tongue sticks to my jaws. And as they die along the way, they aren't given proper burials. You lay me in the dust of death. I don't have any turnaround. Hey, Pastor Sean, okay, let's what are you going to say to make me feel better? Nothing. What's the action steps so I can go feel better about what I'm going to do? Nothing. Sometimes we just need to be reminded. Sometimes we just need to know. Sometimes we need to know our history. And we need to be reminded that that is not just history. Agreements and treaties continue to be broken. The social contract and the social fabric of people, not just indigenous people, but peoples of all kinds, are broken and harassed and surrounded by the bulls all the time. And sometimes what it takes for us to do something is a call to action, but other times it's just to sit in it. Just to sit and steep in the discomfort of how we became a nation, to sit and steep in the discomfort of what was done and what continues to happen. To the indigenous peoples, to the people at the border, to people who are different than what white supremacy is defined. Rather than doing a time of offering and having a song during that time of offering, we're just going to have this song sung by our very own David Sherman to wrap this up. I hope this has meaning for you during this time we are together now and beyond it. Amen.
My home is over Jordan, deep river, Lord, I want to cross over into campground. Deep river, my home is over Jordan. Deep river, Lord, I want to cross over into campground. Oh, don't you want to go to the God